Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we are going to begin. We know that there's a power outage in the city. I know it personally. Power's out at my church, also at my house. Anybody else's power out here? So I know that a number of gas stations are not able to disseminate gas because I tried to get gas on the way down there from 4 stations and couldn't get it. So I hope I can get out of here when this is over. But at any rate, we are pleased that you have come. We are going to begin. I just want to run a check to see what presenters are here. I have a list of those who are here. If I call your name, just indicate present. Tanya Allen, Ivy Bailey, Shalonda Buckman, Clark Durant, Sherry Gay Danyogo, Amari Harris, Virgil Mason, Alicia Merriweather, Ruby Newbold, Thomas Padroni, Iris Taylor, Keisha Burdusco, always one in the crowd. Just like school, okay. All right, and I think I got everyone that is a presenter. Thank you very much, and we're going to call you, not necessarily in that order, but you will be called, and we're going to ask that you might come here when it's time for your presentation to the table that you see on the stage, and you will make your presentation of 5 minutes. The panel may have some questions for those presenters, and then following the panel, the presenters, we're going to ask that those of you who are in the audience that you might be available for questions or comments in the time period of 2 minutes. We're going to adhere to the time period as best we can because we want to try to get as much information as we can into the discussion as well as into the report and the documentation that will come as a result of this hearing and this forum. I'm going to ask the Reverend Maya Reynolds, who is Associate Minister, Fellowship Chapel, and also a teacher, educator, vice principal, and a whole bunch of other things, if she would come and lead us in an invocational prayer. Reverend Reynolds.
Reverend Anthony, thank you. Dance teacher at Cass Technical High School, proud Detroit Public School Community District parent. Let us bow our heads for a word of prayer. Oh God, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, you, oh God, who have been with us along the way, we invoke and invite your presence to be with us right now and here today. We ask that you will continue to guide us in all truth and knowledge as you have revealed from generation to generation. As you spoke to the woman at the well and you said that your true worshipers shall worship you in spirit and in truth. We pray that the scales will be removed from our eyes, that we will love and work in truth and in knowledge of what is right. We pray, oh Lord, that you will align our consciousness, our work, and our building together to place the children as the priority, knowing that they are the greatness that is among us. Give us the strength and the courage to know what is right and to resist evil at every hand. It is in Jesus' name that we give thanks and praise for all things, especially liberation, justice, and peace. And the people of God said together, amen. 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 Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Reynolds. We're pleased to be at the Detroit Collegiate Preparatory High School at Northwestern. I just know it as a big N-O. Northwestern. Anybody that went to Northwestern, raise your hand. Okay, at the big N-O. Anybody in here went to Central, raise your hand. Amen. Let's hear it for the big CE. All right. Central, I know some folk went to other schools, but that's enough right there. Let me just say this. We're very pleased to have you here, and this is a very, very important hearing. And opportunity to input into the quality of education. And we're very pleased to be at this school, Northwestern, It'll always be Northwestern, no matter what label is in front of it, as are the other schools, but we understand change and innovation and all of that. But it has a stellar history, and some very great people have walked these hallowed halls at this public school. And back in the day, in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and for some of you even in the 50s and 40s and 30s, great things have come out of the Detroit public school. Let's give our school system a hand, the Detroit public school system. Great things have come out of that, and we must never ever forget that we came out of that in many cases. Things have changed and evolved, but we don't forget how we got over, because how we got over is still very much a part of how we can continue to survive under certain circumstances and conditions of today. So we're very pleased to be at this high school, and I'm going to ask the leader of this high school, Mr. Kenyano Jones, the principal, if he would come. Is he here? Brother Jones, let's give the principal a hand for the Northwestern Collegiate Preparatory High School, and for him to bring greetings and have remarks in his own way. Principal Jones, thank you so much for opening up the doors of Northwestern for us.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kenyano Jones. I am a product of the Detroit Public School System, Central High School. On behalf of the students and staff here at Detroit Collegiate Preparatory High School, we were honored to host the educational forum that we're having here today. As we sit in these seats that you're sitting in, just note I would be beyond myself that I didn't give honor to Vice President Jimmy Settles, Angelique, Michael Joseph, and the UAW Ford for allowing our students to reupholster these seats and learn in an apprenticeship. So it is partnerships and investments into education like this that fuels not only the school but the community. So I would be also beyond myself if I didn't invite you to watch our coach play right after you're done. We have a basketball game at 7 to 9 in the gym that was also refurbished by UAW Ford after you finish, okay? So thank you again, and we welcome you, and thank you for putting our education first for our students. Thank you. Here at Northwestern, even prior to, we are one of the schools that are on the quote-unquote list. But even prior to that, we've begun to do some innovative things here. Our school districts, under the leadership of intern Alicia Merriweather, intern superintendent, we were granted an innovation grant to actually transform our school into smaller learning communities. And in those communities, we have 2 academies, one STEM-based and one based off entrepreneur and community leadership. That's a very special one for us because we want our students to come back and give back into the community because we know that's how this community is going to come back. So we always are looking for partners, so feel free to contact the school. And it's an investment like those that's going to make not only, again, change the school, but change the community and change our students' lives. Again, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted you to say something about that because that's why we're here, to hear about innovation relative to education and what's making a difference and how Northwestern has somewhat changed since many of us attended high school and where we are today. And the fact that you are working with UAW Ford and they have kind of adopted Northwestern and the grants, and you just described 2 significant programs that you have here where children can meet reality along with their academic study is really what we need to be about, and which is the way education is going. So I wanted you to say that so people would understand what's really happening here. And is this situation unique, or is Northwestern the only school in Detroit that's doing this?
No. If you go to the DPS website, you'll see several innovations that were granted over the last 3 to 4 years. We all have an opportunity to submit some proposals to the district, and they go through an intensive overview and look over for those programs. They decide which ones that they can actually have at the school and also be replicated throughout the district to help improve students' education. And ours was unique. we're actually going to offer several internships when students get up to like the 11th and 12th grade. Those students will be granted internships with partnerships through like PricewaterhouseCoopers, GM, things of that nature. They are already getting that type of education, the real world education, while in school. Also, we have partnerships with Central Michigan University, Wayne State, Wayne County Community College, dual enrollment. So there's a lot going on with the schools. We actually should be and need to be really partners with the schools so you can see what actually goes on. It's hard to see it from a distance, but again, be involved with the schools in your neighborhood or whatever school is close to you, and you'll see we'll open up our arms for you. We will. As long as we have our students in the best interests, we have no problem with gaining partnerships with you. So please do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I just wanted you to hear that because I wanted us to understand what's happening at schools and what's happening in some of the Detroit public schools, because you just gave some reasons why I as a parent would want to send my child to Northwestern, because it's learning and earning, and I have a direct link to something valuable and beneficial to a vocation and a job and a career once I leave these doors. Am I right about that? So that's what this is about, learning and earning and being able to move from education to life-living vocation. And so we appreciate you, and our commendation to you and your staff and to the Detroit Public School system. Thank you, sir. Is Pamela Pugh here? She has not arrived yet? Okay, Dr. Pamela Pugh, who is the educational chair for Michigan State Conference of the NAACP and member also of the State Board of Education. Dr. Pugh.
Good evening. Good evening. And we are so happy to have our national board here, and we're so thankful and grateful for our state president. I don't see CEO White around, but I'm sure that he's here. And to our president, we thank you. I am Pamela Pugh, and I must say that the wind just blew me in down 75. And I, too, I'm a graduate of Saginaw High School, which is a little bit up the ways. And so Saginaw High School was one of those schools that was on the 38 list of schools that were slated for closure, and we're thanking the governor as well as the Michigan Department of Education for putting a halt on those closures. We know that we still have a lot of work to do, but as we look at those school closures, one of the things that I like to do is brag about myself, because I am a product of one of those schools, and I do have education. I do have a career, so we can't always believe what we hear, and I know you all do not do that, and I know that is why we're here, and we thank God for the NAACP, who is here in the fight with us, and for President Wendell Anthony, who has long fought this issue. So I stand with you, or bring you greetings as a member of the NAACP. I can also brag because I've been a member of the NAACP since a child and won't break away from that. And just want to bring you greetings as the state chair of the Education Committee. And just to let the national board know that we stand with you as you fight for equality in education and fighting to close those education gaps. We stand with you as you fight for accountability of all schools and transparency of all schools. I also wanted to bring you greetings as a member of the State Board of Education. 2 years ago, I was elected, and again, I thank my NAACP family for helping me to get there. And as I go to that table, of course, I go there fighting for the equality of all children, and definitely carrying the voice of our urban communities, carrying the voice of our African American, all of our minority children, and making sure that we're fighting to, again, close those gaps in our academic performance. And I also stand with you, Detroit, and I'm assuming that most of you here are from Detroit. And I've talked to Superintendent Merriweather, and she knows that I stand with you in your fight to ensure that we maintain local control in each of these districts. As a member of the State Board of Education, I want to make sure that you all know that the State Board of Education is constitutionally charged and with the general oversight and supervision of public education in Michigan. We do recognize, and this was a statement that we put together a few years ago, that we do recognize that charter schools are taxpayer-funded public schools and propose to provide a new, innovative alternative to traditional public schools. The recent series of articles in the Detroit Free Press that were out a few years ago reveal that there are many shortcomings with Michigan charter school laws. And in Michigan, the original charter school vision has been compromised by a lack of transparency, inadequate oversight, profiteering, and self-dealing among some for-profit management companies and individuals, and too often, poor or indifferent educational performance. And so I just want to let the NAACP again know that we stand with you as you look to improve the school systems across this country. And so the State Board of Education has also called for educational quality expectations, reinstituting a smart cap, allowing high-performance charter schools and operators to replicate or expand while precluding poor academically performing charters from replicating or expanding. Holding authorizers clearly accountable for the academic performance of their portfolio of charter schools and preclude poorly performing authorizers from chartering more schools. Setting a clear standard for new charter schools to open that should include a track record of good academic performance. And then we've also called for development of a charter school certificate of need, whereby criteria and a process is established to demonstrate the need for a new charter school within a community in order to provide a new alternative, innovative, or more effective educational program. So I just wanted to list some of the things that the State Board of Education has in alignment with the National Board, and if you need additional information, we can talk to you about that. As you all know, and I'm sure that you've already heard, and maybe someone has already mentioned, that Michigan has had one of the highest proliferation of charter schools. So we thank you all for being here, and we thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Pugh. We appreciate your presentation and your being here representing Michigan, the State Board of Education. Before I introduce Alice Huffman, who is a member of the National Board of Directors and chair of the National Educational Task Force, who will introduce the panelists, I just want to make a statement, and then we'll have Alice to do the introductions, and then we'll begin our presentations of those who are slated to speak from the table, and then hear from those of you who are in the audience who would like to input and make comments or statements regarding this. I do want you to know that this is being filmed, and it's also being recorded, so your remarks will be recorded, and you are also on film, and so be nice in whatever you say as you get ready to say it, because it is being recorded. We do intend to use this for further illumination of the quality of education that is essential for our children, not only here in Michigan and Detroit, but across the country. The statement is as follows. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said years ago, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." As we think critically and intensively about the state of education in our nation today, we must all come to the realization that it is not functioning at its highest level. The NAACP has historically made education one of its core concerns. Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 brought together critical thinkers and activist lawyers, among them Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, to forge a new pathway for public and equal education. Unfortunately, both in cities and rural communities across America. Quality education has been diminished, neglected, and deprioritized as a cornerstone necessary to fully realize the American dream for all of its sons and daughters. In city after city, whether in Connecticut, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, New York, Florida, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Washington, and now Detroit, we are compelled to reprioritize the quality of education that is being provided to our children. It is often said by many in the educational community that they do what they do for the children. It is our belief, from critical observation, that it is no longer what you do for the children, it's what we are doing to the children. This is why the NAACP nationwide has moved from city to city to ascertain the best practices, the most successful and significant pathways to achieve quality education. While we do not believe that public funds should be provided for private education, we do believe in the necessity of standards for all schools, whether public, private, or schools of choice. We remain open to innovation and stabilization consistent with the history of free and public education long provided to the children of this nation. Today, at the Detroit Collegiate Preparatory High School Northwestern, we are bringing together educators, innovators, and members of our National Board of Directors for this special town hall meeting on the state of quality education and how to advance its cause here in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. This is being done in various cities across the country to provide a clear analysis and perspective. We seek input from people of all walks of life who share a common concern and have a solid stake in the educational future of our children. This town hall is being hosted by the Detroit branch NAACP, the Michigan State Conference of the NAACP, UAW Ford Vice President Jimmy Settles, and members of the National Board of Directors of the NAACP. We are grateful to the Detroit Public Schools for their cooperation and assistance with this matter. The eyes of the nation are now on the state of Michigan and the city of Detroit, in particularly because of the appointment of Betsy DeVos as Secretary of Education. The city of Detroit, after 17 years of emergency management rule over our educational system and its effects, now stands at the crossroads as to what kind of quality and what the direction of education will be for us in this community. This is true not only in the state of Michigan, but throughout our nation. We invite everyone to join us at this most important town hall right now, right here at Northwestern High School. And with that, I'm going to ask that Alice Huffman, member of the National Board of Directors and chair of the Task Force on Education, if she would come, bring greetings and introduce the members of the panel, and then we'll begin to hear testimony from those whom we have called. Alice.
Thank you very, very much, Reverend, and welcome to the Board of Directors of the NAACP, newly elected to the Board of Directors, our new board member. But he wasn't a board member when he agreed to do this hearing. And I thank him for that, because we could not do our hearings across this country and not stop in Detroit. This is serious business we're in, and it's very costly. Luckily, we have a very resourceful task force, which I'm going to introduce each member. And the motion was passed in October to create the task force. And we had our first hearing in Connecticut a month later, and we've been rolling ever since. And we're rolling because we're rolling across the country on behalf of our children. We started out doing a task force on charter schools, and then after you all gave us the president and the new Secretary of Education, thank you to Detroit, we had to expand and not just talk about charter schools, because now we got to talk about quality education and saving the public school system, and that's what we're about. But I'd like to thank my task force for being here, and I'm going to go down the line, but before I do the task force, I'm going to do something before I forget. We have another board member in the House, Mr. Michael Turner. Please stand and be recognized. Thank you. He's a busy board member, too. And we also have joining us as a part of the host and Michigan State Conference and board member, Ms. Yvonne White. And starting way over on the end, we have our education chair and task force member, Mr. Dora O.B. Nwezi from Florida. Next to her, oh, Robin, you made it. Is that you, Robin? We have Robin Williams, who is from the District of Columbia and task force member. Next to her is Mr. James Gallman, task force member from South Carolina. Mr. Michael Curry, task force member from Massachusetts. And Mr. Scott Esdell, who held the first task force meeting in Connecticut, Mr. Scott Esdell. We have the renowned Ms. Hazel Dukes from New York City. And we have a task force member who was just a task force member and state conference president of Mississippi until a couple weeks ago. He is now the vice president of the national NAACP, Mr. Derek Johnson. Oh, he is from, well, he's from Mississippi.
He's from Detroit.
Y'all say he's from Detroit, but it said, that thing says, M-I, crooked letter, I, crooked letter I, humpback, letter I. That's what that thing says up here. By way of Detroit. And then we have Miss Sweet Love, who held our task force meeting in Memphis, Tennessee. Miss Gloria Sweet Love. 3 of the members are co-chairs, Miss Adora, Miss Dukes, and Miss Sweetlove. And so we have a mission. We are here to listen. We are not here to talk. We want to gather this information just to tell you what the process is. We will be rendering a report. We hope the report will talk about charter schools and public schools and recommendations for the improvement. I want to let you know that the resolution stated that we weren't out to kill charter schools, we just wanted transparency and accountability. Yeah. And if you're going to spend taxpayers' dollars, and I'm going to tell you, having gone across this country, that resolution still stands. We're on the right track to ask for accountability and transparency. Wherever you go across this country, you will find charter schools, some good, some bad, but there's no continuity, there's no there. You can't really get a feel for what they're doing because it's all on innovation and it's all on doing things differently, and there is no way for you to tell if they really are being effective. Some are, some aren't. So the resolution that we passed still stands. And then we've expanded it, and we know we got problems in public education. So we want to talk about those as well. But the bottom line, when we finish with all of this expense, is that we're going to have a program that we're going to put forth across this country on behalf of African American children and other children in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. We appreciate that. I do want to, I think I heard the voice of State Representative Sherry Gate Yogo in the audience. Okay. And we had invited Loretta Johnson, who is the Secretary Treasurer of the American Federation of Teachers. Unfortunately, her brother passed, so she will not be able to join us, so our prayers are with her and her family. But we're also very pleased to have a longtime organizer and fighter for education, Sister Ruby Nubo, who's Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers, who will be participating in our panel. Having said all of that, we're going to begin our discussion now. And the way this is going to work is that I'm going to call your name, and we're going to want you to come to the stage and take a seat at the table here and make your presentation in 5 minutes. I have a timekeeper over here because we want to get to everybody and then have the audience to input into questions. We want to do this decently and in order. We know that education is very passionate to all of us, and we have different positions on it. We're not here to beast any one particular mode of education. We're here to lift up the quality of education. So if you have comments, we want you to reduce them to your comments, which we're going to give you the opportunity to do that following the presentation. and we want to respect everybody, even though we may have differences or disagreements with them, and we want to allow them to say what they say so we can put this together and make sense out of what you are saying. And I just want everybody to understand that as we go forward relative to this presentation. Also, if anybody violates that, we do have folks sitting in the audience who are ready to take you out of here. I just want you to know that ahead of time. We want everybody to stay and participate, but we're going to do this right, and we're going to respect everybody. Amen? Amen? Amen. And so you are being filmed, you are on camera, and you are being recorded. Is Jimmy Settles in the house? Where's Jimmy? Okay. Well, Jimmy is a chocolate brother like me, so he got to get in the light so I can see where he is. You know chocolate is good. But we want to thank Jimmy, who is also a member of our National Board of Directors, Vice President of UAW Ford Division, who does an excellent job in the community, working with a lot of different issues, always giving back to the community, whether that be through nonprofits, whether that be education. We just talked about what you all are doing here at Northwestern University. Well, it looks like a university, at Northwestern Preparatory and Collegiate Preparatory School here, the Big NO, because Jimmy went to Northwestern. But we want to thank you for looking perceptively at the school and taking an interest in it. It's like giving back to what you've been given. And so, Jimmy, we'd like for you to come, bring greetings, and make comments to those of us who are here in the task force and for the meeting. Jimmy Settles.
Yeah. All right.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Let me give thanks to this national board for, coming up with having the wisdom to come up to do this tour that they're doing. We take a lot for granted. They spend a lot of time on the road, and one thinks that they get paid.
No.
And that's not true. But they do it because they are committed and their heart is there. Likewise, I just want to give thanks also to the state board. State and have done a fantastic job here in Michigan. As you know, they're one of the leaders in the flood crisis, but any crisis that we have, the state board is always there. And quite naturally, I just want to give thanks to our leader here in the city. We call him the Honorable One, Reverend Anthony. That I can remember our first encounter about 20-something years ago. It's kind of hard to say because he was a little kid. I was a little kid, and he was my paper boy. But seriously, this, I think, is one of the most progressive chapters in the NAACP. I said one of them now. But we are totally indebted as citizens in this city to have such a great leader. He's there not some of the time. He's there all the time. So I just like to say thank you. I'm going to get away from this mic because I know we got some very, very important business, and I'm really, those that, I don't know if anybody leaving tonight because those winds are still high. I don't know, Brother Curry, you calmed down any yet? I mean, he was on that jetway, and thank God that everybody made it here safely, so thank you.
Jimmy, the winds are still very high out there, and I know that has impacted some of us, but we're glad that if you've ever been on an airplane and real high winds and that turbulence when you can't see nothing and all you can do is just sit there and pray. Anybody ever been in a situation like that? Don't you want to kiss the ground when you get down and just hug the pilot? Amen, and we thank God for that. We want to begin now and thank everyone who's had the presentations. I also mentioned that we have a timekeeper over to my right who's going to give the speakers here at the table a 1 minute, a 30-second, and a 15-second time period. So, and I'll see it if you don't see it, so to let you know when it's time to wrap up. And also, we know we have panelists, and you may be inspired to ask a question. But we're going to have a timekeeper over here for panelists. We got a minute and a 30 and 15 for you. so that it does not get out of hand. Amen? We want to try to get to as many people as we can. And this is coming in no specific order in terms of the speakers. I know that there are a couple of people who have to leave early and some who are coming late, and so we want to try to be respectful of that. I'm going to ask Dr. Alicia Merriweather to come, if she would come now, representing the Detroit Public Schools Interim General Superintendent. Let's welcome Dr. Merriweather.
Good evening.
First of all, to be clear, I know you're prophetic, but I'm not a doctor yet.
Okay.
I am in the doctoral program at Wayne State, but to be transparent, it's Mrs. Alicia Merriweather. So
Okay, well, anybody that's trying to operate successfully without children, got to be some doctor in there somewhere. Amen. So it's all good. Go ahead.
All right, I'd like to welcome the esteemed board here to Detroit Public Schools Community District and to DCP at Northwestern High School. I want to thank Jimmy Settles, the UAW Ford, for their investment in this particular building, but just in DPSCD overall. And that really has to be said again and again, because when partners come alongside public education, that's when you see major change move at a faster pace. And I would ask if we could please give Jimmy Settles another round of applause. In education, we do it like this. A round of applause, in all sincerity, thank you very, very much. I want to honor the school board, if they're present, our locally elected and mostly empowered school board outside of the Financial Review Commission, which I know some of our members would state is still a barrier. But we do have school board members here. If you're here, would you stand, please, and be recognized? And any elected officials who are present. Thank you. My name is Alicia Merriweather, and I am the interim superintendent for Detroit Public Schools Community District. I love this city. I've lived in this city my entire life. I started in public school when I was 4 years old in Head Start, and I graduated from Detroit Public Schools. And I'd like to ask anyone in the audience who also graduated from Detroit Public Schools, would you please stand? Yeah. So anyone who graduated, stand up. I always think it's very important to start with that. Public schools work. There are things in the system that may be broken, but not everybody in the system is broken. And we need to look at the things that work and replicate them, and we need to look at the things that are not working and to figure out how to fix them. I'm a proud employee, over 20 years with the public school system. And I'd also like to ask all people who are here who are past and present employees of a public school system, if you would stand up. And if we could give them a hand. So tonight is extremely important. We're talking about public education. And when we talk about public education, we have to really push the envelope on what we're talking about, free and public. And something about that word free sometimes equates to cheap or less than. And I want to push back on that and say that when we're talking about free and public, we're talking about high quality, equitable education. And how do we make that happen? Those are the things that we need to talk about. Just throwing out the word free and public, let's drill down on what that means and how we have some high leverage results. In DPSCD, I appreciate Mr. Jones, our principal here, talking about the things that are happening at DCP at Northwestern. We also have launched several other innovative projects, tuition-free Montessori, so students can have a Montessori education for free, no tuition required. That was launched this last fall. Dual language immersion schools in the public school setting, so students who are taught in 2 languages, English and another language, all the way up, looking at overage bilingual classrooms, looking at STEAM and STEM academies, looking at creative ways to do teaching and learning. So we can take public education and do creative things within that context. But I want to be clear that none of that is cheap. And what we have to talk about in this whole conversation is that change costs money, And we need to put it on the table that either we're going to invest now or we're going to pay later. And I continue to claim the best investment is now. The best investment is now, and there's no greater investment than to invest in a human being. It's never a waste. So in public education, when we look at funding, this issue of equitable funding, I would argue it's not an achievement gap, there's an opportunity gap. And what do we need to do to fill those opportunity gaps and make sure that students get the opportunities that they need? The other things to consider when we're looking at education in a public setting, I'm going to put these out. I see I have 30 seconds left. Student growth and student proficiency both need to be looked at. Chronic absenteeism, as opposed to just daily student attendance. Behavior, and looking and tracking, and what are we doing? Are we just kicking out kids at a disproportionate rate, or what are we doing to make sure that they stay in school? The issue of poverty cannot be ignored. In the city of Detroit, 67% of our children under the age of 18 are living at or below the poverty line, which is a family of 4 living on $24,000 or less. You cannot give the same funding to everyone when you have such different needs. So, my closing, if you are a public institution providing education to students, especially in urban cities, we have an incredible responsibility and obligation to pursue excellence, demand equity, and refuse to settle for less.
Thank you, Ms. Merriweather. Before you leave, do any of the panelists have a question for her before she leaves? Thank you very much. Y'all better, come on now, y'all better get, I'm trying to move this. Y'all got, come on, Sweet Love, Gloria Sweet Love from Tennessee.
I have to say, thank you, Superintendent Merriweather. Do you have some thoughts about, when you talked about these innovative ideas, you named some things you are doing, but I really want to think about things that are transferable, not just here, but that would work in a rural setting or work, you know, in Arizona or wherever.
I honestly think that the ideas that we've been vetting and piloting are replicable. I honestly think when Mr. Jones referenced the innovation proposal process, we've had that for a couple of years, and that's where employees, any employee in the whole organization can submit a proposal. And it's vetted, it's reviewed, it is put through a process where all different departments look at it. So from finances, HR, operations, and then academics, how does this impact the whole organization? And I think by putting it through that type of a vetting, it is replicable because every school system has those departments, and it would have to be sustainable. So I do think that the things that we've done are repeatable.
Can we get her?
I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Merriweather, I guess my question is, are all schools in the state of Michigan funded equally, particularly here in Detroit? And is the funding consistently moving up as the years go by, or are you at the same level you were 5 years ago?
You know, if I stayed quiet for one more minute, I'm sure the audience would start yelling out things about this. This is one of the key issues, is the funding, the way that school funding happens in the state of Michigan. It is not equitable. We get a per pupil allowance, which is about $7,500 per student. And then additional monies can come depending on the locality in which you live. So the way that funding happens in the state of Michigan is an interesting thing to examine, and I don't want to take up too much time, but to your question, funding is not based on need, it's just based on across the board, this is what you get from the state, and then local communities have additional subsidies.
Ms. Merriweather, your remarks are so very important. Same thing for all of the presenters. If you don't mind reducing them to writing the points that you made so that we can have those. If you have them, we'll take them. If you want to take a moment and get them back to us. Right, get them back to us, because we'd like for your comments to be included in the reporting that we do as we put together the results of the hearing. We appreciate it. If this, Derek.
I am a graduate of Western High School.
Come on. Cowboys, okay.
And I do recall when I was in high school, I had two of my friends who went to Votech. And one is now engineer because of that. Another is an air traffic controller because he went to the program where the students learn how to fly an airplane. My question to you is, what impact has the school choice movement had on Detroit Public Schools' budget?
So because our funding is based on enrollment, one argument could be made because there are more choices and parents go and investigate other choices and enroll their students in other schools, then obviously that has led to a decline in enrollment in Detroit Public Schools Community District. What's true in the landscape of Detroit is currently we have 97 schools, 93 buildings, 97 schools in DPSCD, and there's about 100 charters in the city of Detroit. So Michigan, as you probably know, had no cap on charters. And so charters opened in the city in an unbelievable rate. And that impacted our enrollment because parents, when they have choices, and I need to be clear, I don't think it is a problem to have choice. I do think that the same measurements need to be held for all publicly funded schools. So I want to be really clear. I want to be very, very clear. My main objective is that DPSCD becomes the first choice for every Detroit resident and a great choice for others. But in the meantime, I'm not opposed to competition, but let's be fair about it. And then the other piece is having some order to how schools are opening and closing. And I can tell you that even just this fall, DPSCD stepped in to assist with a school that basically notified parents on a Tuesday that they would be closing on a Friday. We stepped in to help because we care about children, and it's unbelievable that someone would choose to do that. But there's no regulation around that, and so there's lots of other implications I'll put in writing.
Thank you, Ms. Merriweather.
Thank you.
And this is burning because I'm trying to keep this in a certain time slot, but go ahead.
Robin.
Rob, I know who you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments. So with your new pilot programs that you were talking about, how do you measure the success of them? From test scores or how are you measuring?
Great question. So, of course, we don't believe that test scores are the truest measure of anything unless the test actually tests what you think is important. So we look at a number of different factors. We look at enrollment, so how many students actually enrolled. We do look at student growth. We do look at student proficiency. In some of the programs, in the metrics, I should say, that we're looking at, we created a data dashboard. I was appointed a year ago yesterday, and within the first 6 months, we created a data dashboard that had not existed before. And that data dashboard shows, at any given time, chronic absenteeism at each school, daily attendance, student growth, student proficiency. Then you look at the demographics, so you can see ethnicity, special ed population, free and reduced lunch. So you can pull up any school, and we can look at trends in those categories, and those are the things that we're looking at overall. And then you drill down, and there have been walkthroughs, check-ins at those schools, interviews with family and students and the teachers, and all of that data plays into, are we going to continue this? Are we going to repeat it? And so that's basically how that cycle works.
Thank you, Ms. Merriweather. We appreciate you. Thank you very much, and please get that to us in writing. I'm not going to ask Tanya Allen if she would come, president of the Skillman Foundation. And also one of the co-chairs for the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children that recently completed their work relative to recommendations for the school system in the city of Detroit, and also implications for the whole state that was reported recently. Ms. Allen. Also, you're getting a copy of the report that was done by the coalition as we completed its work. Ms. Allen.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Reverend. Anthony, I want to say thank you to the National NAACP Board of Directors and the task force for coming here today, but more importantly for raising this question across the country, and particularly talking about what does this do for Black children in Black cities. And I just think it's extraordinarily important, so I want to just say thank you on that. I would start off with a couple of things. You heard from Mrs. Merriweather about some of the conditions that are going on in Detroit, and I will talk more about many of them. Can we get the volume up? Yeah, I can get closer. Here. I've never been accused of not speaking loud enough. But I want to just tell you a couple things about that report that you have in your hand. So basically, a group of about 36 people that crossed political, social, charter, traditional, public, various sectors came together. A very representative group, including the community, always to the business sector, the religious community as well, philanthropic organizations, et cetera. We all came together because we were exhausted with what was happening in our city around schools. Exhausted particularly because what we were seeing is that we were getting more choice in our city but less quality. And so as a result of maybe about a 4-month process, we actually took 100 days and we all worked extraordinarily hard. Many of us in those 100 days spent more than 100 hours looking at the data together, identifying what the problems that were occurring in the city together, and then coming up with a set of solutions that we voted on, and many of those solutions included compromises. There were no purists in this. We were trying to figure out what is the right thing to do for our city. And so you'll see many of those, but I want to just give you a couple of thoughts about what's happening in our city, and give you some basic thoughts about what I think the challenges are. So you heard about 57% of the kids in the city live in poverty. What's important for us to know is that 84% live in concentrated poverty. Why that's important is that we know that if you live in a neighborhood where you have more than 30% poverty in those communities, that even if your family is not poor, you are more likely to mimic the results of the children who are than actually your socioeconomic status. So you have the tipping point working in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. The second thing I think is important for you to know is over the last 15 to 16 years, Detroit has lost more than 40% of its population, and that particularly hit hard on children. So you saw a school district in the last 10 years, in just DPS alone, you lost 65,000 kids. So when you start combining that with families that moved out of the community, increased charter choice, and then parents deciding that they wanted to choose different options, it became a very disaggregated system. Overall, there are, the district serves about 47,000 students. EAA, which is a state-run entity, serves about 5,000 students. Charters inside of the city alone serve about 35,000 kids. Another 20 or another 12 or so, 13 or so kids go to charter schools outside of the suburban ring, and then you have about another 10 to 15,000 that are going to school in traditional suburban districts. Now, why do I name that? Not only is that a disaggregated system, there are 14 different entities that make decisions today about whether or not you open or close school, and none of them are necessarily coordinating. There's no mandate on that. So what we've gone from is basically a school system to what many would say a system of schools, except we have no system, okay? So there's no planning, there's no supports. 88,000 kids go to school proper in the city of Detroit, 185 school buildings. Just to give you a contrast, in 1999, it was 180,000 students and 264. Population has decreased by 50%, but our schools have reduced only by 30%. And the last thing that I would say about that I think is extraordinarily important for you to know, that is with over 100 school closings, nearly 200 school closings that have happened over the last 15 years, and over 100 new buildings opening. So basically, if you're a parent and you're trying to figure out how you're going to choose a school, it's basically Hunger Games for you, right? Like these kids, as Lamar Lemons would say, who's on our school board, this is education refugees. Families are desperately looking for places, and we have nothing in our community that actually enables them to make good choices in this hyper-choice environment. The last thing, I know I'm over time. The last thing I would say is that when you look at other places that mimic Detroit in terms of percentage of choice, they have put in place systems around equity, systems around how you do transportation, how you do enrollment, so you create a fairness for people to get to the schools that they would choose to get to, and that those schools are actually serving the same sets of population. The last thing I know, Camila, you just gone, I'm up here now, Reb go kick me off. But the last thing I want to say, we got 49 schools that are on the closing list from last year from this year and next year, that the lowest performing schools. The thing is that the state is measuring that based on these test scores, but the last thing that we never talk about, they never look at what kind of students are in these schools. And most of the schools in Detroit, the public schools, there's a higher concentration of children with special needs. Right. So you have these schools, some of our high schools have upward of 50% of children who are special needs. So you don't have this student population distributed, nor do you have equitable resources funding.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. A couple of questions. Hazel?
Yes. In your poverty line, do that include the homeless?
Yes.
Okay.
Scott X?
I have a question around this 14 entities making the decisions around the closing of schools. So the Board of Ed here in Detroit doesn't make the decision?
No, so
Can you clarify that piece?
Yes, so we have the school, there are 14 different entities. Most of those entities are universities that sit outside of the city of Detroit. Detroit Public Schools can charter their own schools, but they do not have control over other charters in the way that many cities do have that. So there's no singular charter board like Washington, D.C. And so we have a hyper competitive environment where you can have all of these various entities working in one geographic domain. So there is nobody in charge. And so when I give those numbers, sometimes people ask me, well, I've seen this number different here, another different number there. And the reason you'll have different numbers because there's nobody, literally nobody in charge of the children in the city of Detroit. You don't know where they are. You have to work extraordinarily hard to figure out where children are, where schools they go to, if they're in school or not in school. We have no idea until it's after the fact. We're looking at autopsy data. We have no ability to look at projections going forward.
Final question, anyone? Thank you, Ms. Go ahead.
Real quick question. I've not had an opportunity to look at the report yet, and I'll do that while we're here. Can you give us an understanding of where you are with the report and what is the receptivity of the elected folks here to receive this and make those changes?
Okay, so we finished the report, I guess maybe a year and a half ago, and then we took a year with a really big, hard, and tough battle in Lansing on this, where we have our esteemed Secretary of Education who beat us in the 12th round, but we took her, I just thought about it, I'm being taped, we took her to the 11th. And so there are some things that we were able to do. One of that was to be able to get almost $700 million reinvested in the district to prevent it from being in bankruptcy. There has been a limitation on the charters, the opening and closing of schools by charter authorizers, and you can only do it by accreditation. There's now a grading system for all schools, A through F grading system that we did not have before, but how they're trying to apply it is not applicable. We did, lastly, try to argue for a centralized body that would create a kind of authority over all schools. not a school board, not to usurp that school board's authority, but to be able to think about how you do certain things and lift it above the individual operators to be able to look at common transportation, common enrollment, all of those things that you would traditionally do. And that was defeated. That was a defeated effort.
Thank you, Ms. Allen.
Thank you,
Appreciate you. Also, Tanya, if you'd like to submit some of your comments in writing, I know they have the report, but if it's anything that you want to send, just send it to us. Send it to us. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Definitely. And would you please include the things you just told us about what you got through the legislature and what you didn't? Thank you.
Is Iris Taylor in the house yet? Okay. Thomas Padroni, Associate Professor, Curriculum Studies, Wayne State University.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
No.
Get close. No,
You must have cut it off.
he is. He's
You
speaking
can't get
very
no
good.
closer than that. It's the mic.
There it is. Oh, he's in
I was in audio visual at Central High School.
Tell us your name.
So I want to thank so much the NAACP National Panel for being here today. I understand this is your 5th of 7, so you are spending some real time and dedication around these issues, and it's very much appreciated. I think that you are at the leading edge of leading a very important national dialogue about the direction that we take to best serve our children. Thank you also to the local NAACP for allowing me this opportunity to speak and learn from both the other presenters and the national board as well. Really briefly about me, I'm a professor of curriculum studies at Wayne State University. I've been studying metropolitan Detroit and Detroit, specifically the educational context here, for a little bit over 10 years. I myself was a school teacher in New Orleans before Katrina for a number of years. In a 99% African American school, and I taught in the Twin Cities as well. And you may be interested to know that my research, my first research, was with African American voucher families in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So as you probably know, there's a voucher program that's been in place there since 1990. And at the time, what made it so interesting is that it wasn't just that folks came in who wanted vouchers from above and put it there. There was actually an active movement of a lot of parents and community leaders who had long been struggling for educational issues, for equal access, who had previously been a part of integration movements, who had previously been a part of trying to form an independent African American school district, who were now leading this fight for vouchers because they sensed that in that moment, that we were in this moment of everybody talking about markets, and that maybe the best way to try to advance your circumstances was through this voucher program. Now, I was someone who, because I was a school teacher myself, I didn't sense that what we needed was market competition to make us better. I knew we were working so hard, the overwhelming majority of my colleagues. But I also had a lot of understanding of those parents because my school that I taught in New Orleans was also in very poor condition. It wasn't serving those students well. And so I understood the drive of the parents to want to find the best possible thing for their children. And I've always put that front and center in all of the work that I've done and all of the advocacy work that I do in the community as well. I applaud your partnership with Journey for Justice Alliance. I've worked with G2 Brown and Journey for Justice for quite some time. I work with the local affiliates of that organization, Detroit Life Coalition and Keep the Vote No Takeover. Hopefully together we'll do the work that needs to be done for the children of Detroit and all the children of America, but especially children in our big cities. I think the one thing that I want to highlight, knowing that I probably have very little time left, is this. This is my main point. You are in a state right now where the governor took the voting rights of an African American electorate away in the city of Detroit, in the city of Flint, and in other places as well. And we see what happens when the decades-long, really centuries-long struggle for voting equality is taken away. We are in a state where Rosa Parks in 1999 joined Ms. Helen Moore in filing suit against the state for this first state takeover, saying something, and I'll never be able to capture her eloquence, but basically saying, I didn't struggle for the right to vote in the South, only to lose it when I came to Detroit. Right. In wrapping up, there are many good charter schools. They played a role that was once important in our city. However, they also proliferated so well because the state controlled the district and ran it into the ground for most of the last 20 years. And when African American voting rights are taken away, Flint happens because the checks and balances aren't there. And the decline in Detroit public school happens. We are at a moment now where Detroit public schools can finally compete and where it can finally act in a way, especially if it gets the funding it needs to advance what children really need in this city. Thank you very much.
Did you, before you leave, Dr. Patron, did you have a sum up sentence or phrase you wanted to do before we get some questions?
Okay, I thought I was way over, so.
No, you good. I mean, I'm gonna give you.
Okay, thank you.
60 more seconds.
My summary would be to you to say that I have long worked with African American organizations. I joined the NAACP the day that you signed the moratorium around charter schools because I see the damage that has been done. There are good charter schools in our city as well, but I think that we need some time now to reclaim what is best about public education. And one thing that charters don't have or likely will never have is an elected board.
Right.
Charters take public money, but they do not have an elected board. Democracy is key. I believe in democracy and its power.
Okay, before you leave, questions, Alice?
Yes. Thank you very much for your testimony. When you looked at the voucher program in Milwaukee that Polly Williams and her group led,
Exactly.
what were the results?
What I found so interesting, I mean, first of all, the many parents and community leaders that I talked to, I learned from tremendously. And basically, what I wanted to basically say was we needed to listen to those parents. They were being disrespected in a lot of the public discourse around vouchers because people were saying, you know, the vouchers there in Milwaukee, they're being funded by the Bradley Foundation and other right-wing foundations. That was true, they were. These were the same people who were funding the bell curve, which argued that African Americans and Latinos were inherently biologically, intellectually inferior. These same people were funding the voucher program. So right away there you go, oh my gosh, what is this partnership? Right. But what I saw was that there was a lot of brilliance and intelligence among the African American leaders and parents who were advocating for it. They were saying, we know how to best advocate for what our children need. We're gonna take charge of this. Now, what I found so interesting in Milwaukee is that the things that the parents said that they valued in the voucher schools are exactly the things that we're fighting for public schools. They said that they didn't say, oh, we hate the teacher unions and teachers are bad. And they said, we want small class sizes. We feel sorry for those teachers in those public schools. If they had smaller class sizes, they could give the individual attention to students that they need. And so everything they told me was not about the right wing. Everything they told me was common sense about what public schools should be doing. And I hope that we can attract parents like them back in as we restore our public education, put it to where it should be with our innovation.
And then a quick follow-up. You've been studying Detroit schools for 15 years?
A little over 10.
10. So do you have a significant finding, other than they don't have control of the school system?
I think one of our biggest defects has been state control. I think it's been disastrous. And it started under Governor Engler, who, by the way, was a really big charter advocate. And that's not lost on us, that he, rather than creating a market, he put his thumb on the scales and made charters even more attractive than they would have been. Because the public schools were so hampered during all of that time. Now, the last thing I'll say is I was actually opposed to the Education Commission that Tanya Allen and some others have alluded to. And I'll tell you why. I had no problem with the charters being regulated, is that they would also tie the hands of the elected board. And if there was one thing that the elected board needed, was not to have some of its power usurped by an education commission. I favor a solution where it's the elected board itself that is the body that controls opening and closing. It's the board in Chicago, for example, that does that as well. They control opening and closings of charter schools.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Petroni. Thank you, sir. If you wanted to submit something in writing, please do so also.
Thank you.
But
I had a question.
I just want to say that
I had a question for him.
Scott.
Yes.
I need to ask this
We want to
question.
have a conversation.
He's going to ask the
very
question. so you might
important.
as well-
Go ahead.
I came a long way to ask him this question.
Okay, he's from Connecticut, so we'll
for.
forgive him. Okay,
Right.
go ahead. Go ahead, Scott.
Because he's done a lot of research
Go
on the
ahead.
Detroit public school system, and if we took all the charter schools and put them to the side, there still seems to be a major dysfunction.
Yes.
Not only in Detroit, but all across America.
Absolutely.
The solutions in reference to where do you think we need to be geared towards in reference to dealing with the dysfunction in public school systems across America?
I would highlight two things, and I'll be quick about it. I was going to say three, but I don't think I have time for three, so I'm going to go with two. I'm a teacher educator. So one of the things that I really want us to finally do is focus on academics. We've been talking about governance issues. Those are important because democracy is important, but I want to really talk about what we need to do in the classroom. I would talk about pushing aside the tests. I know that Charlonda Buckman will talk about opting out of tests, and I'm very happy about that position that they're taking. Especially in our urban centers, the tests, which basically just tell us that people are poor who attend the schools. We already knew that. Right. The tests are pushing aside everything from the curriculum that keeps students in the schools in the first place. So we've got to push those aside. We've got to bring in or return pedagogy that is culturally relevant to our students. And that gets at their meaning systems, that makes education about something other than just producing a test score, that addresses the whole human being, right? That's what we need. We also need the funding piece, okay? And I hear people who say you can't just throw money at the problem. I agree. We've got to know why we're asking for it and where it's going to go. And we have, to our fortune in this state, an adequacy study that the state paid for to the tune of $500,000 or something like this, that it's not following. And what that study basically did is it mimics what Alicia Merriweather, interim superintendent, spoke to, which is it says, okay, let's establish a base value that all districts, all schools should start with, and I think it puts it at about an 8,500 starting point rather than the 7,500 where we are right now, as she attested to correctly. But then it says, look at the particular needs of students in each of these different districts and adjust accordingly. We know that one of the things that has really hampered DPS has been the unfunded mandate around special education students. The law says the right thing. The federal law says that we need to serve those students, but then the federal government doesn't fully fund it, right? And so that is a serious problem for us. But we're at a great moment for DPS-CD right now because the state has met some of its financial obligations. Until this year, the first $1,200 of each per pupil that was going to instruction in Bloomfield Hills and some of our other wealthier districts was going to debt service that the state created. Wow. It was going to debt service to the banks. And now finally, that $1,200 is able to go back to our children again.
Thanks, Dr. Bergerner. We appreciate it. And if you can get some of that back to us, and appreciate it. And I just want to make an addendum. As a member of that coalition that you spoke of, we were very strongly in support of an elected Board of Education. I just want to make that point because I was there and I know the discussion. So, matter of fact, many of us supported the new educational board that we have now. Matter of fact, this is the second time that we have been a part of a coalition to push for an elected school board. I chaired a task force when Governor Granholm was the governor called A New Beginning, producing a 68-page document similar to this on reforms in Detroit and for an elected school board. That's how that old board got elected before the state took it over the board again. And now we did it again. So I just want to make that point. We've always been in support of an elected board in the city of Detroit, and now we got one. So I appreciate your comments. I want to make that point. I'm going to ask now that Keisha Verdusco, if she would come. Is Ms. Verdusco here? I'm sorry? Verdusco, okay. Verdusco. Thank you. Ms. Keisha Verdusco. representing the Director of Charter Schools for Detroit Public School System. Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Lift the mic up a little.
Okay, is this better?
That's fine.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm here in my capacity as the Director of Charter Schools for the Detroit Public Schools Community District. We are the largest school district in Michigan. We're the second largest authorizer in the city of Detroit, and we're one of the oldest authorizers in the state of Michigan, having begun authorizing in 1994 as soon as the law became effective in the state of Michigan. Our mission as a charter school authorizer is to support, develop, and hold accountable high-performing charter schools and to prepare Detroit children for college and careers. As the only authorizer headquartered in Detroit, we take our dual roles of oversight and support very seriously. We are the resident school district for students in 97 district-run schools, as well as 14 public charter schools. So we're keenly aware of the challenges that face Detroit students and their families. We're committed to ensuring that every student in the city of Detroit has access to the programming that they need, regardless of our much publicized financial woes. This is why we were the founding authorizer of the Covenant House Academies, which service homeless youth. It's why we are the authorizer for Pathways, a charter school that serves pregnant and parenting teens in the city of Detroit. We're an authorizer for Escuela Avancemos, a bilingual immersion school on the city's southwest side. And we're the authorizer for Capstone Academy, which is a school for adjudicated youth. These are a variety of programs in addition to traditional college prep programs that we authorize. As a school district and as an authorizer, we're in a unique position to identify the needs within our own community and then move to fill those needs, whether they be by direct running schools or by issuing charter contracts to others who can do the job as well. In other words, the act of issuing charters alone is not the solution. It can be a solution for us. It can cause, obviously, some issues for others, but for us, it's a matter of being able to have the flexibility to give parents that choice. So as you consider the moratorium, I ask you to consider some of the unique characteristics of Detroit. Some have been mentioned already. The erosion of our tax base, more than a decade of emergency management, and the closure of dozens of district schools over the last few decades. This has transformed our landscape, and our charter schools are not simply destination programs anymore. Many of them have become de facto neighborhood schools, educating children who walk to school and operating in buildings that were once occupied by the school district. They're serving the same population of students. They're also subject to the same regulations as every traditional public school in Michigan. In the state of Michigan, unlike other states, charter schools are treated the same as public schools under the law. This is where the issue of oversight is what's so important. So, for instance, Detroit Public Schools, as an authorizer, does not allow sweeps contracts. Those are when people talk about charter schools not being transparent, they're talking about charters who have their boards sign over every penny to their management company. That is a practice that we do not agree with, and we do not participate as an authorizer. Charter schools are required to hire certified teachers. As an authorizer, we ensure that that happens. We inspect their records, their personnel files 3 times a year to ensure that it takes place. They're required to serve students with special needs. So I'll cut my comments short, but I want to also let you know that DPSCD has been recognized both locally and nationally for our quality charter school oversight. So I also want you to think about the fact that across this city, fewer than 10% of students were proficient in math, social studies, and science last year. That's regardless of governance. Fewer than 20% across the board were proficient in reading. Those results are not better across the state, where only about 40% of students are proficient. So the challenges that face our students are universal. The difference between public school results and charter school results is unfortunately very similar. What we should be looking at is poverty, the funding that's needed, and being able to truly fix the problems that are affecting our schools.
Thank you. Questions? Derek?
First, I want to thank you for doing something that I have not heard any of the charter providers do in the 5 hearings. You acknowledge that the quality education that you perform have not resulted in any measurable difference compared to public school. And so I want to thank you for doing that, because in all hearings, they have all tried to say they are performing better, but none of the data provide that, prove that. So also understand the eroding tax base that has happened in the city of Detroit, and the fact that the state has been culpable in creating a fiscal nightmare for the city. But what I struggle with as I was listening to you is understanding how adding an extra layer of governance called charter schools have also created some of those same problems. Because if the goal was to give parents choice for better education, and you have stated that you have not provided any outcomes that have outperformed public school, why do we need the charter schools in this space that's sucking resources from the public schools?
So I guess I should clarify, I didn't say that there are not charter schools that are performing better. There certainly are. I was taking everything as a whole. So if you take the state of Michigan as a whole and you look at our levels of proficiency, white students, black students, Detroit students, Saginaw students, Birmingham students, they are not where they should be. Our levels of proficiency are in need of work in terms of our results. And so we could say, well, this charter school has 25% proficiency and that district school has 5%, but we shouldn't be praising 25%. And that was the point that I was trying to make. I do believe that there are charter school programs that are doing a very good job. They are, in many cases, offering choice because of the types of programs, particularly that we can offer as a charter authorizer. We could not afford to continue our pregnant and parenting teen program as a school district. We are now, as an authorizer, able to have that program serve students within the city of Detroit without it costing us what it used to cost us as a district to run the same program.
That's no different than saying, I went to Cass Tech, and he went to Central, and this one here went to Persian. And of course, Cass Tech is doing better, but it's all a part of the public school system, so as we look at it as a whole. What we have been sold is that charter schools will be better than the public school system. And what you're telling me is you do have some that's doing better than other charter schools, but as a whole, you're not performing any better. So my question is, why do we need another layer of governance that's taking resources from an eroding tax base of a system that's in a fiscal crisis because of the state's management? How are you adding value to that reality?
I think you would have to speak to the parents of children who are in charter schools, because I think if you do speak with some of those parents, they can tell you concrete examples of why that choice is working for their particular child.
I had friends next door to me who went to Cass, and their parents swore that Cass Tech was way better than Western.
Right, and that's why choice is important, because what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander. Some people like...
When do we address the question of your choice is impacting my child's ability to get access to quality?
just funding.
See, when one family have a choice that impact 10 other families, is that a true choice? Or is that a preference over disadvantaged children?
All the children across the board are, one could argue, the same free and reduced lunch rates are being serviced in charter schools as they are in district schools. What you have to understand is that in the city of Detroit, dozens of schools have been closed. And in those closed buildings, where students used to be able to walk up the block to their school, in some cases, charter schools popped up because it was the only way that a child could stay within their neighborhood and still have a school to go to. And so some of the problem that has been created has honestly been self-inflicted because of different reasons. State management being one of them, the financial crisis being one of them, but we have to understand that a lot of these schools are serving neighborhood children who would not have a school to go to if those schools did not open.
Thank you, Ms. Verduzco. Thank you.
My final comment now, when you say
this time is
closing,
moving.
the schools are closing, but some of those schools are closing because the average daily attendance have been taking from the district, resulting in less money that has been taken by the charter schools. So the arguments you're making, I hear you loud and clear, but I'm not understanding the logic because the charter school system is a part of the problem along with the eroding tax base and the fiscal crisis because you are taking money away from the children.
We got some other folk who can say something about charters as well, Derek. Thank you. But it's getting beyond the time. What I'd like to do is, because I'm conscious about time, we got stuff on the agenda.
Are we over time?
And so what I'd like to do is if you could submit your critique in writing to us, and then you've heard the question and concern, you might want to explore that and do that a little broader. Thank you, Ms. Verduzco.
Wendell, could she also tell us, in her written comments, could she tell us if she takes all children in the neighborhood?
Okay.
And, wait a minute, and can she tell us a little bit more about the sweeps? First time I heard the sweeps, and I'm really interested in that.
Okay. Did you hear that, Ms. Verduzco? Can you tell us if you're taking all the children in the neighborhood without any kind of discrimination? And can you talk a little bit more about the sweeps that you mentioned in your analysis, in your report back? Thank you very much. I'm going to call now State Representative Sherry Gay Danyogo. And we are on time. We're moving right along. If I can keep the panel together. And I don't know why you mentioned Central and Cass and Pershing, and we know that Cass is going to be. When I was going to Central, no, it wasn't like that. Central was the bomb.
Is this Ms. Sherry?
Stand up for your school. Thank you, Ms. Gay Danyogo.
With your beautiful red on. I know that's right.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to this national board, to our board here locally, of which I am a member of. An honor to be here. I am a former Detroit public school teacher, as well as a product of DPS, and my son graduated K through 12 from DPS, and yes, he's a proud graduate of Cass Tech. I'm not here to defend Ms. Verduzco, but in the line of questioning, I don't think it was completely clear that as DPS as a charter authorizer is totally different from some of the other authorizers that we have locally. So while I'm not here to defend her position, I think some of the resulting mechanisms from the state, and we use that word loosely because I'm from the state, but I'm not the part of the state, or I'm on the Democratic side that did not create this crisis that we have with our public school system. So that was mostly in gubernatorial leaders who led that, as well as members on the opposite sides of the aisle. But I think you will further direct some of those charter questions to those that are coming up later. So with respect to some of the issues that you've heard already, some great testimony. I too did serve as a voice, a participant on the report that Ms. Allen spoke about earlier. I embraced a whole lot of it, not completely all of it when it came to the legislative aspect. I had a unique experience, as a matter of fact, transitioning from being a teacher and an activist, working on this work, having a master's in instructional technology, a discipline that seeks to find gaps in systems and then close them, being a fellow that went out to Oakland and San Francisco, which studied education reform, and then came back home to seek ways to bring systems together, being a proud union supporter, faith leader, civic, being engaged in all those different disciplines, bringing all of them together to try to address this crisis, working with congressional leadership, all of which, especially mentor Congressman John Conyers, to host a number of forums similar to this to bring awareness to the issues that we're facing. Now transitioning to the legislature, realizing we have such a fragmented problem within our communities. You all are here from various states. In Michigan's legislature, we have 110 members in the House. We have 3 two-year terms, which create term limits. So 6 years, full-time legislator, except for the weeks that we get out for spring break and holidays, et cetera. We are there, but by the time you get some institutional knowledge and understanding what is taking place, it's time to go or transition for those who are serial politicians to the next elective office. So the history of DPS, I learned a great deal from my policy director, former Representative Lamar Lemons, and now school board member Lamar Lemons, who's working in my office, who took me under his wings and helped me to understand the history of DPS that started back as the professor pointed out earlier, when we had a surplus. It's not about people outside of Detroit that wanted to fix our schools. It was about them wanting the money. We were the largest district, we still are, but it was that $1.35 billion that was passed in 1994 that they were after. And they got that money and they built some of the buildings, and some of them that they built very poorly, but it was about that money. And at that time, it was mentioned that we had approximately 167,000 students. 99, we had a $93 million surplus, but they passed Public Act 10, which Governor Engler allowed a takeover and appointed board, as Rev spoke to. In '72, we had a Democratic governor that had her hands in this as well, and she gave us our first emergency financial manager, which was Robert Bobb, and the story goes on to 5 emergency managers later. And so the board did not have authority over our school district for many of the years that we've had state control, 16, 17 years. Wow. So we got it for a period of time, it was taken back, and again, it was all about the money. Being there now, most people who are making laws about our city don't understand anything about our city, they don't understand anything about African American children, and they take their feed from what is stated and perpetuated in the media. Right. And unfortunately, that's black children can't learn, or black people can't govern themselves. Right. And so the harm that this is doing, even when we have divides philosophically, locally on charter versus traditional public, what group you belong to, what committee you're on, do you support our legislation or do you don't? It compromises us because we are in violation with the Voting Rights Act when you look at how charter schools are governed. And what I mean by that is, if you have a child that is displaced, and I gave a press release to you of the Detroit caucus speaking against them displacing our children to other communities, right. If they were displaced into those communities, their parents would not have a voice right. with that school district and that elected body. If their children are sent to charter schools, right. they don't have a voice even in the city right. because most of those charter schools and management companies are based miles and miles away right. from the city of Detroit. So the children are already disenfranchised right. by that model. Last thing, I was invited to Washington, D.C., the Department of Transportation. At one point, I didn't understand what the rationale for me coming. I'm an educator. Right. But I went, as well as our former Detroit caucus chair, and we learned that we're also in Title VI violation with respect to transportation. We've created school deserts. We don't have an operable transportation system that is throughout our city. And so you have children that are displaced. The schools were closed more in the history of any other governor in the state, in Michigan's history, that created this collapse, this tsunami. And so now we are like Katrina, although they had a catastrophic incident that caused theirs, but we're like Katrina because now our schools have been decimated, and we're fighting each other, sometimes black on black, on which way we think is right, and oftentimes the educators are not a part of the discussion or at the table. And so I'm proud to be in the legislature, but I think we have to do some work ourselves. I think we are grieving the spirit of people like Septima Clark with the work that we're not doing and the lack of cohesion that we have as people. And so I applaud you in doing this, but we have to make this the civil rights issue of our time to truly bring about a change. And it can't just be about us and our group. It has to be collective that puts the children first, because we are in trouble if we allow our children, these 47,000 children remaining in DPS, and those who are fragmented throughout the city of Detroit, to drown at this point in this educational abyss. Their blood is on our hands. So thank you so much for the work that you continue to do, and thank you, Rev, for this opportunity.
Hold just a second, Sherry. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
I just want to say amen, because I think that's why I came to this task force, to try to see could we come together. That's why we are having just not public education, we're having the charter people.
Yes, ma'am.
We believe, and I've always said it, and my chairman knows, I think there's good and bad in everything.
Absolutely.
There are some good charter schools. There are some bad charter schools.
Yes.
There are some excellent public schools. And there are some bad public schools. So we got to come together on the quality.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why we changed it, as the chairman said this morning at a press conference. We started off at charter. What we are looking for is transparent. That's what Vice Chair Johnson was getting at. The transparent that the difference we heard today didn't set too well, because there was nothing said that it was better than what you have in some of the distance. And so we want to have quality education, whether it's charter or public.
Absolutely, and I've taught
Public
at both.
and charter.
I've taught at both. You're absolutely right.
Right, so that's what we're getting at for our children, so the blood will not be on my hand.
Amen.
Any other question?
Yes. Yes,
Robert.
thank you so very much for your comments and your report. You know, this here in Detroit and what you all are speaking, you're making the ties to voting rights, the redistricting, even right to work, the state of Michigan going right to work, to the Flint water crisis. This is all connected to what they're doing to our communities. And we must fight for our children. So I think this is the heart of this conversation, and how critical the civil rights piece is to fighting for our school system, to our voting rights. And this right here, I think, among all the hearings that I have attended, this here, you all have clearly tied the voting rights, the water crisis, and the right to work piece to the crisis we're having in our public education. Thank you very much.
Alice Huffman.
Yes, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Representative, for being here. And I know it must be frustrating to be in a house where you can't get justice. But I'm wondering, how long do you think that's going to last, and is there any hope that Michigan can get its act together and take back its representatives as we need to?
I thank you. That's the question that I drove up this morning, and I had an opportunity to ride up with Board Member Lemons, and I asked that question. I asked, have I bought into a false belief since a child that patterning my life along with the Honorable late Shirley Chisholm? I asked, did I buy into a false narrative of what I believe was possible? And some days it's very tiring, sometimes it's very frustrating, but I feel tonight, looking at each one of you, I don't feel no ways tired. We have to do this work. We have to continue to tell our story in an articulate way so that they can't just dismiss us as incapable, inadequate, and not being enough. We are able to do the work. What we must also highlight and address is the correlation between poverty. I taught it both at charter and traditional public. I started my career teaching at a charter. I went to DPS. I ended my career teaching at a charter. I see the same challenges in both schools. And so while I kind of may unnerve some of my members on the other side of the aisle my first term, this term I'm going and I'm talking to them, even in uncomfortable situations, about how if you just look at the difference, if you look at the correlation between poverty, whether it's a charter or public, there's a pattern. He mentioned the adequacy study. It's nothing adequate about it. You cannot expect DPS to take the lion's share of special needs children and then expect them to perform. Like Tanya said, who's in the schools? If all the people that get the wherewithal to leave, thank God, I'm state rep, so he ain't left, but you got people who get, and it's okay for them to leave the city, but we have to realize when we feel like we're getting better, we're doing better, we all leave the urban center, and now who's left? Now we're struggling and scrapping, looking for teachers after they decimated our district. But we also got to look at the problems that persist in our elected leadership. We got to call folks out and hold them accountable when they're selling us out. And sometimes we get comfortable and unwilling to call people out because they're our friends. If you're damaging our children, you're my enemy. You're not my brother or my friend.
Thank you, Representative. Certainly, I know we have the press statement, but if you want to send anything else, please do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.